Welcome, everyone, to Our Whole Lives Taking Flight. Today, our topic is reclaiming sexual identity through Carnival. We're so excited that you're here with us today. I'm going to just take a moment to ask you, as you are led to have any questions today, that you use the Q&A feature down at it should be at the bottom of your screen. We ask that you put any questions you have in that rather than the chat. It helps us so much to be able to track those and get to them, which we will do at the end of this webinar. My name is Reverend Amy Johnson. I am the Minister for Sexuality, Education, and Justice in the United Church of Christ, and we are so excited for this program today. I'm going to turn it over to my co-host, Melanie.
Hi, I'm Dr. Melanie Davis. I'm the Unitarian Universalist Association's Our Whole Lives Program Manager. And with us today is our fabulous guest, Onika Henry, who I met through the Widener University Human Sexuality Education Studies program. And Onika is also an Our Whole Lives trainer for all levels of Our Whole Lives. Onika, would you like to introduce yourself further?
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Davis. So hello, beautiful people. My name is Onika Henry. I am joining you from the land of the Kalina and Lacona people, colonially known as Tobago, part of Trinidad and Tobago. I am a clinical sexologist and sex educator. So that means that I help people overcome challenges and issues that they have with sexuality and sexual health. I develop lesson plans, workshops, teach. And I'm also a theater artist, so I like to combine my theater background and theater and drama techniques with how I teach and train and work around sexual issues. Yeah, that's about it.
And I want to apologize for mispronouncing your name, Onika. I think I Americanized it, so I apologize for that. So today, Onika is going to present the Trinidad and Tobago Carnival Festival, and by extension, the Caribbean Carnivals born out of slavery and colonialism, as a dynamic repository or container for knowledge, rituals, traditions, modalities, and even values and beliefs passed on by Caribbean ancestors. It's a space for communal or collective joy, practices, and eroticism, as well as an opportunity for individuals to unfold into a free and authentic self through which they can fully integrate their sexual selves. So take it away. We're pleased that you're going to be giving us this presentation.
Thank you so much. All right, so I'm going to share my screen. I have a few slides to share. And when it comes up, just let me know that you can see it. Oops, hold on. There we go.
Now we can see it. Thank you.
There we go. All right. Apologies up front if any weird things come up on the screen. I'm sharing from an iPad. And so sometimes the technology doesn't always work so smoothly on this platform. But here we go. Part of reclaiming one's sexual identity, at least in this space, also involves decolonizing Caribbean sexuality. And the ability to do that decolonizing, reframing what we've been taught through enslavement and colonization is what really helps us to become our free and authentic selves in terms of our sexuality and being able to integrate that with who we are. So let's begin. All right, so this is a Tobago Carnival character. It's called the paper doll or paper girl. I am that person in the red mask. This character was my first introduction to being in a carnival space and being asked to embody sexuality and sexual performance, including sexual and sensual language. And so for me, this was a very eye-opening experience when it comes to recognizing how inhibited I was around my own sexuality, around inhabiting my body fully. But a little bit about how I would want you to contextualize Carnival. It is our street theater, and it is where we get to perform and use role play as ways of representing or representing ourselves, our lives, our stories, and our imagination. It is where I and you can use expressive arts for social and behavior change. So I'm offering you this context when we think about Carnival and the role it can play when it comes to social and behavior change and what it can do for how we see ourselves and share and express ourselves, including our sexual selves. So let's go back to some ancient ways. In other words, looking at the Caribbean ancestors, and that would include the indigenous people of the Caribbean region, the folks who came here via enslavement, so those who came from Africa, those who came here afterwards from India as indentured laborers, as well as those who also came after that from China. And now we do have even more, so it's a huge melting pot of people. But all of those folks brought their ancestral ways, which they were able to hold on to and keep in the carnival space. So let's talk about what they brought and what we've inherited from them. So many Caribbean indigenous peoples, we also refer to them as the First People Nations, were matriarchal. They recognized more than two genders. They recognized third gendering and homosexuality positively. And they understood gender in egalitarian terms rather than in terms of subordination. So that's one group of people. Gender was not an organizing principle in Yoruba society. Yoruba here referring to a group of people from West Africa, specifically Nigeria. And so gender was not an organizing principle in Yoruba society prior to colonization by the West. The Ifa system, which is a system of religion and science, states that anybody can have any combination of masculine and feminine energy, regardless of genitalia. So power was not gender determined. Interesting fact, before colonization, there was no word for gender in Nigeria. It's not translatable because it didn't exist as a concept. From gay Sufi lovers to Hindu transgender women, India's sexual fluidity was always a dirty, barbaric concept to its Western invaders. And it is crucial for the LGBTQ community here in the West to understand this. This isn't India becoming westernized, it's India decolonizing. This comment is referring to the reversal of laws that criminalized homosexuality, that criminalized everything that was not heterosexual. And so the view was at the time that this was happening they're coming up to modern times, they're being westernized, when in fact, they were actually decolonizing and going back to how things were before colonization took place. Another interesting group of people from West Africa, the Dagara people of Burkina Faso, they have no word for gay or lesbian. Instead, the word that they have for folks who are not heterosexual is gatekeeper. I love this word. They are mediators, and they have a strong spiritual connection, and they have access to non-human beings. Gatekeepers have the ability to direct their sexual energy to spirit. They were able to act as a sword of truth and integrity, and the vibration of their bodies are different and special. And so discrimination against folks who were not heterosexual did not exist in this particular society. In fact, you were considered to be really special and gifted if you were a gatekeeper in India. So gender, homosexuality, and transgenderism were treated as fluid and without shame in Hindu myths with stories of gods who could change sexual partners and even change their own gender. So outside of Hinduism, even in the most conservative regions of India, sexuality and same-sex relations were socially common and not only accepted, but embraced. Also from the Dagara tribe in Burkina Faso, they have rituals yearly for men to nurture their feminine energy and for women to nurture their masculine energy. This is part of what they do regularly every year as a culture. One of the things we also inherited from our Caribbean ancestry is sex seen as something spiritual. It was not a bastardized aspect of humanness. It was just another way of communing with divine energies. And so in some of our ancient groupings and societies, sex and spirituality were automatically connected. They were one and of the same. So if you're involved in sexual activity, automatically something spiritual is happening. Sex was seen as medicine, as something healing. Erotic energy is seen as healing energy. And so what came out of the legacy of colonialism is what has been very harmful and damaging in our space, and dare I say, the rest of the world that experienced colonization in the way that the Westerners have done it. The binaries and the pathologies specifically. So let's take a look at what I mean by this. So coming out of colonization, sex, as we learned it and as we were taught, had to do with binary biological factors. You're either male or female, in spite of the fact that 1 to 4% of the world population are actually intersex. Oftentimes, intersex folks are surgically and hormonally turned into males or females rather than accepted as part of the normal diversity of human sexuality. The conversion therapy for sexual orientation, in some spaces, people still attempt to try to quote unquote cure people who are homosexual or not heterosexual. That is also something inherited through colonialism, not part of our original ancestral views of sex and gender. And for those of us who are people of color, particularly people of African descent, our sexuality was always pathologized and considered animalistic. We were referred to as oversexed, we're brutes, it is dirty. And so one of the things that we've inherited in this region is that sense of what we refer to as the unholy trinity, fear, shame, and guilt around our sexuality, particularly as people of color. Women and men, once again, that binary view, presented as being opposed and in hierarchical categories. If you have no penis because you're a woman, no penis means no power and you cannot participate in the public arena. Bodies of color considered unattractive. There have been studies coming out of the US, peer-reviewed studies I remember that I learned about while I was at university, and that quote unquote proved that the least attractive women were women of African descent or women of color. So generally bodies of color were unattractive, brutalized. We apparently feel less pain, have no agency, and were considered less valuable, and of course, less beautiful. And then the epigenetics. This term refers to studies that show that you can actually inherit trauma in some form as a chemical mark on your genes. And so particular characteristics or tendencies can be passed down through future generations, through behavioral changes, brain development, diseases, etc., because of the trauma of our ancestors. And so, given all of that, the pathologies, the negative attitudes and worldviews, for me, in looking at how we can use what we already have in our culture to help with healing and bringing some sense of catharsis around those issues, was to look at mass. And that's another word for carnival. Mask as in short for masking. And so a mindful approach to mass is my way of saying, if we look at what we have in our carnival spaces, the rituals that are there, the characters that are there, then we would find that our ancestors have ancestral wisdom in there in order for us to achieve sexual well-being. So it gives us tools in order that we can practice, that we can put into actualization to help us achieve some level of sexual well-being. And so this is my definition of mindful mass, or a mindful carnival experience. Mindful masqueraders, for example, are deeply aware of the sense of freedom, uninhibited sexual and sensual joy, and the fact of fully inhabiting and accepting the body that one has, while also noticing the thoughts, sounds, sensations they are experiencing in the present moment. They can store this as a resource in their soma, that body-mind connection. So they can store it in their soma memory, to which they can return for knowledge, wisdom, and doses of pleasure as medicine. So what I'm suggesting here is that experience, you can find a mindful way to engage in it, to embody it in such a way that becomes your quote unquote like muscle memory. And so instead of having a trigger that brings up a negative memory, we have a shimmer or a glimmer in our bodies. that brings back images and feelings of pleasure. So let's talk about what masks can offer, or what Carnival can offer us in terms of accepting diversity, particularly diversity of body types. So Carnival loves all body types. So melanated bodies, voluptuous bodies, differently abled bodies, intersex bodies, pregnant bodies, all of the types of bodies that colonialism would normally discard or despise as being less than, all of them find a place and can have a space in Carnival. When we think about gender diversity as it's presented now and as it's being taught now, through the study and play of Carnival characters, for example, males playing female characters, ritualistic cross-dressing, which had no stigma attached to it in our ancestral history. That was part of how you were able to learn about others and to connect with those who were of a different gender. Those are things that you can literally teach and help people to embody through learning how to play particular Carnival characters. So for example, so many of you may be familiar with that character that walks on stilts. In Trinidad and Tobago Carnival, we call them Moko Jumbies. They don't have a sex or gender. They are neither male nor female. They have a purpose. And so anybody can play or be a Moko Jumbie. Doesn't matter what your genitalia looks like, right? So specific characters that have specific roles to play, anybody can practice and try on those roles in this Carnival space. So it's one way to teach empathy and to teach about sexual and gender diversity. So some shots of what the different bodies look like on the streets during Carnival time. Just gonna give you a while to let these images soak in and perhaps check in at what's happening with your body. What are your mirror neurons in the brain doing as you look at these images, and perhaps imagine yourself in this space. Mass and personal healing. So let's talk about agency and personal power. During that time on the streets, my assertion is that you can reassert your sexuality as something powerful, fun, and liberating, and entirely owned by you. In other words, you decide how you want to move your body, with whom you want to move it, and how you dress it. You decide when, what, and how you get to display any part of your body. There is no judgment. There is no expectation. There isn't anybody who's going to be there to say, this is unacceptable. And so you get to play with that sense of reclaiming personal power and agency over your body, with other bodies doing the same thing, with music in the background. So there is this communal joy practice or communal erotic practice that is very liberating, powerful, and fun to experience. Clearly, Carnival exposes you to the existence of sexual energy and your power and ability to sense and manipulate that energy. And so you can learn to channel it into responsible and creative ways. Now, specifically here, I am suggesting that part of the preparation for being on the road with other overly exposed or even underexposed bodies in terms of what you're wearing puts you in direct sensations of your sexuality, of erotic energy. While preparing for going onto the road, I mean, there's like months and weeks of preparation before you become part of the 2 days of partying on the streets. There are ways in which people prepare their bodies. And if you do that in a strategic and deliberate way, you find that you can literally, as some people do, channel that sexual energy into creative work. So in a mass camp, for example, where the costumes are being constructed, where the designs are being made, where people are coming together to create these pieces of work, and the music is playing in the background, you are literally using that energy and that motivation and pouring it out into creating something tangible that will actually be on the streets that perhaps you yourself will be wearing. Some more images of being on the streets. Notice the pure joy of all these melanated bodies in a space where no one is saying what you're doing is unacceptable, that your sexuality is welcome here, it is celebrated here. And notice the picture on the top left with the gentleman in the wheelchair. So there are many ways that people with all kinds of body types and abilities are able to find a space and really enjoy themselves with others. Pregnant bodies, no exception. What's interesting about this picture, like I know the story of these two ladies, that they met each other during this carnival space. So they did not even know each other before. All right. And so pregnant bodies are also welcomed and still considered sexual and invited to enjoy their full, authentic sexual selves on the street with everyone else. Sis did not even wait till her injury was properly healed, but she had a crew with her, her little community who made sure that she was okay, still out on the road, playing carnival. I want to bet that that healing probably took a whole lot less time, just because she was able to flood her body with the chemicals that the biochemicals, your pharmacy, the body's pharmacy that produces those feel-good hormones from experiencing sensual and erotic joy, and just the joy of being with your community and your friends. Continuing with mass and personal healing. Catharsis and trauma processing. Interestingly, this is where I started my inquiry about the mindfulness and the techniques and tools that exist in Carnival. So role play, choosing a character to act out, express and experience catharsis from sex-related assault or violence. My first introduction to someone meeting this was while I was a theater arts student at the University of the West Indies. We were learning about a particular carnival character called Jab Malassi, or Black Devil. And this Jab Malassi character, this young woman played this character every year. But she explained that she started playing the character as a way to bring about catharsis and healing from her experience of sexual violence. The character has a long tail, a pitchfork. It's covered in black, well, traditionally molasses, but now that they would use other material that blackens the skin even more. Very oily, very menacing character. And so it looks like a little imp, devil imp. And for her, that character gave her some protection. She was able to express herself, move her body in any way that she chose. And no one would harass her. No one could come close to her. No one could even, no one could approach her even on the streets to dance with her or interact with her. But it gave her the space to be aggressive, to be loud, to scream, to shout, to move her body in the way that she wanted, be witnessed doing that, be held doing that, and to be allowed to do that, because that's a space that's allowed for that, while she was still able to move her body in very sexual and sensual ways. So, continuing along that example, movements that connect us to our physicality, our sensations and breath, which help to release the numbness and pain stuck in our nervous system and tissues from sexual trauma, is part of what one can experience in that carnival space. Carnival also allows you to connect to your emotional reality. So there is this huge outpouring of feeling and emotions in our music, the lyrics of the music and the melody and the rhythms. And all of that creates a catharsis for hurt and pain, a remedy for isolation from heartbreak, or allowing you to experience the bliss, joy, and wonder of romance and love. So if you can imagine a festive space where the music and the lyrics are talking about all these wonderful things about connections and love, you are in your full sexual and sensual self, and you're allowed to just be in a safe enough and brave enough container. This is the Jab Malassi character that I was speaking about. And traditionally, way back in the early days of Carnival, these characters were actually money-making characters. They would threaten to get you really dirty, or perhaps poke you with this pitchfork unless you paid them money to go away. And they would particularly target the upper class society, or the former plantation persons, quote unquote, well, the white people who would pay their money to go away. And so in my mind, that was, you know, one way of having reparations and getting getting paid for labor that you were not paid from before. And so there is a deep socio-political role of this character, because the molasses that they traditionally used to cover their skin was what was valuable for the plantation owners then. And so you devalued it by using it in the masquerade traditions. You were literally preventing the use of your labor for the benefits and wealth of others by devaluing this product. There's a whole lot more I can talk about concerning this particular character. Let's talk about how mass helps with community support and connectedness. So that group energy. So when you are in this group and all of us are in our erotic and energy, and we have the same or like-minded intentions, it's a very, very powerful catalyst for change and for discipline to achieve something. Because you're preparing for this for weeks together in a group. People are also more resilient, more whole, and heal faster in a community or group context. And this community context also creates a container that supports our full growth, embodiment, and expression of our humanness, including our erotic and sexual selves. So this is me with my theater arts group. This is our Jab Malassi, or our devil band. I was actually interviewed about Carnival and sexual healing, and spoke about how, with the preparation for our band and teaching our characters how to play, our members how to play the characters, you know, what came out of that experience. So this is us on the road for Carnival in Tobago some years ago. Another thing about the Carnival space, so we have something that's called mass camps, which is where the making of the costumes happen, or where you're learning the moves of a character. And these are spaces to become unshackled from any kind of fear or uncertainty. Because learning, for example, to walk the stilts, learning to crack whips, learning to stick fight. Stick fight is a martial arts that's developed and came out of the Carnival space. Those things are done in a group setting. And there are many persons, particularly members of the LGBT community, who have used the power and the techniques that come out of learning these characters to be able to find the courage to face their families when it comes to revealing that they're not heterosexual. So local martial arts like kalinda, that's another term we use for stick fighting, the rope jabs and mokujambis, these characters will stretch and challenge your physical abilities as well as your mental fortitude. And so you do not go into space learning this and not come out the same. You will be changed, you will be transformed. There is a level of risk-taking, but in a playful way, which gives the skills that can be transferred to real life. Like I was referring to, coming out of the quote-unquote closet. So you find that many folks who come from the sexual minority communities find ways to practice their courage and their bravery in many carnival spaces. What those carnival spaces offer is a safe, or safe enough is what I should say here, safe enough container of like-minded individuals, the elders who were there and who've had many experiences before. They've walked the path before you. And so they are there for you when you're on your journey for yourself, but you're not necessarily by yourself. There's a container of people who are there to catch, to support while you're working on your personal journey. So this is a picture of persons practicing kalinda or stick fight. Notice that gender doesn't matter here either. You have here what looks like a senior woman in a stick fighting pose or dance with a male. This is one space where you're literally coming face to face with your fears and learning about your opponent and learning how to reconnect with your opponent after the conflict. So this is about conflict resolution. And so there are a lot of conflict resolution skills that come out of this calendar practice that happens during our carnival space. Right, so all of that was about looking at ancestral, looking at what you can gain, what is very specific about the techniques and events and processes during carnival time. Part of the reclaiming of ancestral wisdom in mass has to do with the values that you would find within a carnival space. So values of ritual, many ritualistic events and practices are part of preparing for traditional, particularly traditional carnival characters. What is your intention for playing mass or carnival this year? What tradition would you want to choose that matches your intention? Making the commitment to go through the learning of a chant, learning the songs, learning the movements, learning how to walk in stilts, learning how to crack whips, learning how to stick fight, the commitment to go through the process. And of course, community. You're not doing this by yourself. You are with others who are also saying, all of you is welcome here. And I always like to highlight how important ritual is in the psychology of ritual. So if you're participating in what I call a mindful mass, and it has a ritualistic aspect, it is a very clear beginning for the carnival parade itself. So juve, which comes from the French to begin or to start, is a beginning of the carnival festivities on the road. And then there's also a clear ending, right? Just at midnight on Ash Wednesday. And so there's a very clear container in which these rituals are taking place, a clear ending and a clear beginning and a clear ending. And when we talk about what rituals can do, all of these here are indications of what people can experience during the practice of a ritual. And it becomes even more powerful when this ritual is happening in a group or community setting. So this is my little infographic, something I put together to suggest to folks really how they might approach taking part in a mass or carnival tradition. So I say add spice to your mass, meaning make your mass or your carnival experience very intentional. So the S in the spice represents setting your intention. Carnival is also about, it's about ritual, resistance, rebellion, resilience, as well as surrender, joyful acceptance and pleasure, and somatic release. And so I offer these as intentions for folks to choose from. And you could also have one of your own. But Carnival has clear characters and events that focus specifically on these, on resistance and rebellion, on being resilient and being able to carry out or fight for your intention for what you want in spite of forces that are coming against you. It also has practices and characters that allow you to just surrender to being in your body and to joyfully accepting the body that you have and where you are at that moment in time, which can also be something very pleasurable. So there are characters that are all about pleasure, they're all about being in your pleasure and allowing you to explore the neurobiology of your pleasure. And of course, somatic release, specific movements, particularly the movements that involve the pelvic thrust and the pelvic circular movements, etc. Are all about somatic release. And then the P and the I, picking an activity to match your intention. So picking for your intention. So you can choose from a variety of mass traditions and activities that would match your intention. So for example, if you're looking at resilience, for example, you may decide to become part of the kalinda or stick fighting tradition. If you want to focus on rebellion or resistance, there's something that we have called Old Mass, where you are making fun of, where you are showing up the politicians and the social authorities who are not doing right by the society. And that's a particular mass tradition. If you're simply looking for joyful acceptance and pleasure, I would perhaps suggest that you look at the more modern day, quote unquote, pretty mass bands, where you simply choose a costume that you love, with a theme that you love, and with a group of people, and you are just there for the sheer joy and pleasure of it. So picking an activity, there are many, many things to pick from. And if you're a musician, there are particular musical, what we call our steel bands on our drums, that would allow you to experience your intention through music. And then commit to learning. So some characters have chants and songs that are specific to them because they are speaking out about their expression, they are speaking out their thoughts as part of their performance, or they're speaking out about things that are happening in society. So a lot of these characters are also socio-political statements as well as individuals expressing themselves. You may decide, like I suggested, that you become part of a steel band group. You are learning the movements of a character. So you're getting very much into the soma, into the body. And of course, there are other features of a traditional activity. So making your costume, for example, what symbols or colors are you adding to your particular costume that represents putting on and embodying what those symbols mean, so that you can act those out when you're on the streets. And the last part, engaging with a group. In other words, find your tribe, find your group of people who you're going to be with, who will support you and who you would also support on this carnival journey. So you choose a mass camp or a mass band or a group that you'll be playing mass with. And those words at the bottom there, ritual, revelry, and release, those are actually the words and the tagline for the Tobago Carnival, which ended on Monday this week, actually. So I had a really good carnival weekend. So add spice to your mass. And I believe this is coming to a close here. So hopefully we should have lots of time for questions and comments. If we have inherited generational trauma, and we certainly have, then surely we have also inherited generational wisdom. And so I invite you to take a closer and deeper look at our authentic and traditional carnival arts and see what gifts our elders and ancestors have left for us. What can you take that's safely healing for you? These are some references that I have here in case people want to know some academic support for what I've shared. But this brings me to the end of my presentation. So I'm going to stop share screen.
Thank you so much. That was so interesting. There's so much that people from other cultures can learn from that. The SPICE acronym that you went over, I think that being intentional and choosing the way that you want to interact with others and with your sexuality, I think is wonderful and inclusive and healing. Thank you for sharing that.
Welcome.
I want to just say, Onika, if you are willing to send us those references that you had at the end, we can make sure we get those in our follow-up email to folks and also on our website.
Sure.
Yeah, so that people can have access to them. I also just wanted to say that I think there was a question in the chat, and because it's a smaller group today, I think I might be able to go back and find it pretty easily. Somebody asked, how are the spaces kept safe when there might be people who would want to spoil them and have them not be safe?
Right. So there's definitely going to be those experiences where folks are either drinking too much and fights may happen, etc. And so what they've employed now, and when I say safe, let me give some context. We're talking here about safe enough to express who you are in terms of your sexuality. I'm thinking that what that person is referring to is that physical safety, harm if fights and that kind of thing happens. So there's lots of presence of security who would look like or dress like probably members of the band, so they're not going to be obvious security folks for the space. There are also campaigns that happen, public campaigns and public service announcements and campaigns that happen before that encourage people to stick together, be in groups. There are tips that the police service would give for folks to remain safe and take care of themselves and take care of each other during the carnival period. So in terms of that kind of safety, we'll always have that kind of challenge because it's a huge, big public festival that involves hundreds of thousands of people, literally. But the safe spaces that I was specifically referring to would be within that mass camp and those spaces where you are being vulnerable about who you are as a sexual being, being vulnerable about who you are, what you want in the carnival space and what your intention is. And so to open up yourself to that kind of scrutiny, to learning traditions, to exploring the limits of your physical body, as well as what you are comfortable with in terms of expressing your sexuality, that is a safe enough space that I was really talking about. Safe enough, brave enough spaces.
Yeah. I'm thinking about the circles of sexuality and an intimacy when we talk about vulnerability and risk-taking.
Yes.
And hearing your presentation today, like here's this thing with hundreds of thousands of people that could be seen from the outside or even experienced by some people as just a free-for-all, but you're saying you can use this intentionally as a healing mechanism to choose intentionally who you are going to be with, how you're going to show up, that you are going to choose people that you feel you are safe enough to be vulnerable and take risks with in order to do this healing. Am I hearing that?
Yes.
Yeah. And what a beautiful thing. And I know I wasn't the only one who was just, I don't know, I won't speak for the other person, but I was just delighted by the idea of the difference between triggers and shimmers or glimmers, that creating those touch points, that those intense somatic experiences that can then be touch points for healing as opposed to trauma.
It's a whole, I think you said in the chat, Amy, that it was a reframe, which I have a question about how this is carried to other, I mean, I know that there are communities in the United States that have Carnival, and I'm wondering, has the spirituality and intentionality transferred as well, or has the focus more been on the decorative and dance aspects of it?
Right, the spectacle of it. So as far as I know, and I have not actively participated in carnivals outside of the Caribbean region, as far as I know, it has not been translated. And I know that because there have been many conversations, seminars, conferences, etc., that have been put together just to address that very issue, that we've exported, quote unquote, some of us have exported this Caribbean traditional carnival, and we've exported only parts of it. And so it comes across for many as just this huge party, of bodies of color that are behaving really, it's just like pretty debauchery, And a lot of the traditional elements of carnival has not been exported. So that proper preparing of your body, the changing of your diet. I mean, some traditions require that you change what you eat so that your body can build capacity to actually perform the character that's required on the days of carnival, even performances before carnival days. There are some folks and there's some groups, some carnival characters that require that members abstain from sexual activity for several weeks. And they go into a trance-like state during their performance. And then there is also the fact that the Caribbean indigenous peoples, they hid their traditions in the carnival masquerade. And so in order to hold on to their ancestral traditions, they would create a space where, okay, in these days leading up to carnival, we are preparing our bodies, we are doing these rituals, we're eating these particular things, we are abstaining from these things. And then on carnival days, we put on the costume and the full regalia, and the music and the drumming, etc. And then we go out in the streets with everyone else. And that was done in order to not lose their tradition during colonization.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So they had to hide it and pretend, okay, this is just part of us having fun. Nothing serious happening here, nothing to see here. Just pretty costumes and feathers and people dancing and having fun.
There's a question that we just got that asked, do any of the Brazilian Carnival practices reflect the Caribbean practices?
I think it's the other way around. I think we have imported some of the Brazilian look in terms of how costumes are made, and how things happen. But Brazil's carnival, in terms of its traditions, are also very, very different from the Caribbean carnivals. But yeah, there's no, at least not as far as I'm aware, that has been happening. The similarities, of course, is when it happens, because once again, it comes with a particular calendar that came out of that Roman Catholic tradition. You know, so that happens at the same time in Brazil. The other Caribbean carnivals took place at the same time as well, but it became commodified. It became a commercial thing. And so in order not to compete with each other for those foreign dollars, they shifted their carnivals from the traditional, Tuesday, the Monday, Tuesday, going into Ash Wednesday. Yeah, but everyone had it at the same time until it became a huge money-making commercial festival. Does that answer your question?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I think that it, like you're saying, and I think there's many things like that around the world, right? That have become commercialized, but have their roots in some deep cultural and traditional practices that are lost.
Yes.
You know, that are lost in the service of capitalism and in the service of commercialism, and for us to be mindful, right? For us to be mindful and intentional about how we are judging things, like, especially I think in this group of folks as sexuality educators and trainers who are working with youth and adults and many of us in faith communities, to be aware of what, how our faith was colonized, and by our faith I mean Christianity, because we're the ones that do a lot of the damage, right, out there in the world with things that people say we believe. So to be aware of that, and to be aware of that frame when we're coming to other practices and other traditions, and to be aware of the beauty and the depth of intentionality and the depth of faith practices that are included in things like Carnival. Yeah.
And it's interesting. I mean, Carnival came out of the Roman Catholic Church tradition. And it is, I mean, the term, the word itself, it seems, means farewell to the flesh. And so, you know, the church in Europe at the time would allow folks to indulge in all kinds of excesses on the Monday and Tuesday, and then you show up fresh on Wednesday and receive your ashes in church, and you're going through your period of fasting for Lent. And so what the enslaved and indentured peoples did is that they were able to put their own masking traditions into that European carnival space in order to preserve what they had. So it was a way of covering up, once again, their own values and their traditions. So it was rebellious, but in a way that the colonial masters were not able to recognize. It's like, oh, they're trying to copy us. Oh, they're trying to be like us. When, you know, instead of trying to be like you, but we are finding really creative ways, subversive ways rather, to hold on to our traditions.
I was, I think my most favorite Ash Wednesday ever was in Tanzania, and it was in the end of February, right, in 2020. So it was right before everything just shut down. And I had the privilege of being there with an Anglican priest from Church of Sweden and a imam from South Africa who does amazing LGBTQ positive work in the global South. And we were doing a training, and it was Ash Wednesday, so we decided to do an ashing ceremony. And what we did, in addition to having some palm leaves that were if you don't know, the tradition is that the palms from the previous Palm Sunday are burned, and those are the ashes that are used on Ash Wednesday. And traditionally, the thing that is said when you're ashed, when ashes are put on your forehead or wherever they're put, is that you turn from sin. And what we did was, in addition to the ashes that we had with some palm leaves that we had found, was to also have people write on a card things that they wanted to let go of around their beliefs around sexuality. And so that was all mixed together in what was ashed, and we were turning away from those mistaken or unhelpful beliefs. It was really powerful. It was really powerful and beautiful. Yeah.
Beautiful.
I wanted to ask a question about, you had shared the photograph of the people practicing with the sticks. Was it Kalimba? Was that the name?
Kalinda.
Kalinda. And the words I wrote down were embodied conflict resolution and also facing your fears. And I'm wondering how that connection works. Is it the fear of conflict, or the fear of of really revealing what your fears are? How do those merge together?
That is a particular martial arts that is taught by folks who have that training. So I don't know that I can respond to that because I've not been part of that training or that community. What I do know is that before you go into that ring, that space where you are fighting an opponent, you are taken through a series of analysis of self. So, what parts of yourself are you afraid of revealing? What parts of yourself do you think hold you back? What parts of it do you think are obstacles? And then there is learning the movement and becoming more embodied and owning your body. And then there's also the fear of someone else, quote unquote, who will be your opponent attacking you. And how do you respond to them? How do you protect yourself? And then how do you, at the end of the conflict, no matter who wins, how do you then reconnect with them? And there are particular steps and particular rituals to show that, okay, we've come to the end of the fight, of the conflict, and we are connecting. So how are you repairing?
Mm-hmm. I love the, I can just see how that could be translated into couples work. And not necessarily with the weaponry, but with helping people see that, before I can work with conflict with this other person, I really need to understand what my stuff is and what my fears are. And then I can get into dialogue with a partner, and hopefully with the end of resolving it together. So that's where my mind was going, and that this could have other applications as well. Thank you for that.
I thought that it was really a lovely comment that Laura put in the chat, that the conflict transformation and resolution needs some sort of physical aspect to it. Like you can only talk so much, right? And knowing, and so to having some, even if it was like holding a position or something.
Yes.
Anyway, we're getting into that.
Yes, and there are also what are called, quote unquote, battle hymns or battle songs. And so there's that vocal part of it that's happening while, and the drumming that's happening. So Kalinda is not done without music. It's always done with music. There's always the supporting musicians and the songs and the chants. And so an example of a member of the LGBTQ community who shared with a friend of mine that when they were preparing to come out to their parents, that it was one of the battle songs that, that they learned in that Kalinda that was playing in their minds, and that they were embodying to prepare themselves to have this really difficult conversation.
Nice.
Wow.
So it's it's been really, really powerful for a lot of people.
Well, thank you so much. It was just fascinating, amazing. I know I'm going to want to go back and watch this again and take that in some more. Just having this presentation was healing for me today. So thank you so much for your gift.
Yeah, and the photographs were lovely. I just couldn't stop looking at the one of the two pregnant women. Was so glorious.
Gorgeous.
Yeah.
And the joy, like you said, the joy on the people's faces. I do want to just let all y'all know that we are right now working on our 2024 All Taking Flight, what we'll be having for you. And we don't have that yet, so we encourage you to check our websites to find those in the future, what to sign up for those. We will not have a public All Taking Flight in December. That is a time that we reserve for our trainers. So we'll have some time with them, and we'll be back in January, the first Wednesday in January, with another All Taking Flight, to be determined what the topic will be. So please do reach out and look on social media, and we will look forward to seeing you back here next year. I was joking earlier that we have given up trying to predict what the new year will hold yet. So all of us are done with that. Will you please give Onika some love in the chat and thank her so much for her amazing presentation today. And thank you all so much for being with us on this Taking Flight.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.